Wall Street, a canyon of concrete and glass where billions of dollars shift hands at the speed of light. To the untrained eye, it is a chaos of numbers, tickers, and shouting traders. But beneath the noise lies a foundation built entirely on a single, fragile human emotion: absolute trust. We trust that the numbers on our digital screens represent real value. We trust that the institutions holding our life savings are guarded by unbreakable laws. But what happens when that trust is weaponized by geniuses? This is the story of Olympus Global Fund, a financial phantom that managed to capture the minds and the fortunes of the world's most powerful elite before vanishing into thin air. In the winter of 2021, a new name began to echo through the exclusive clubs of Manhattan and London: Olympus Global Fund. It didn't launch with the usual aggressive marketing or loud press releases. Instead, it spread like a secret among the ultra-wealthy, a whisper network of hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, and royal family offices. The rumor was simple, yet intoxicating. An elite investment vehicle had been created that bypassed the traditional limitations of the stock market. A closed-door fund that was quietly outperforming every major institution on Earth, hidden away from the public eye. At the center of this sudden phenomenon were two men, Arthur Vance and Julian Vance, twin brothers, barely 30 years old, possessing an almost hypnotic charisma. They didn't look like the typical, stressed-out Wall Street executives. They were calm, calculated, and spoke with the absolute certainty of men who had unlocked the secrets of the universe. Arthur was the mathematical mind, a prodigy who graduated from MIT at age 19. Julian was the master storyteller, the face of the company, capable of convincing the most cynical investors that their money was not only safe with Olympus, but destined to multiply. The brothers claimed to have achieved the holy grail of finance, a predictive quantum trading engine. They called it Aegis. According to their confidential pitch decks, Aegis was an artificial intelligence connected directly to global fiber optic communication nodes. It didn't just analyze past market data. It scanned global news, social media feeds, political updates, and satellite imagery of shipping ports in real time. The brothers claimed Aegis could detect market shifts 3 to 5 seconds before they manifested on the trading floors of New York and London, executing millions of micro trades with zero human error. The promise was mathematically staggering, a guaranteed fixed annual return of 12.5%. In a financial world plagued by inflation, volatile tech stocks, and economic uncertainty, a guaranteed 12% was unheard of. It was an impossible figure. Yet the Vance brothers had the data to back it up. They produced beautiful, flawless performance charts spanning 3 years, showing a perfectly straight line moving upward, completely untouched by market crashes, geopolitical conflicts, or interest rate hikes. It was the perfect financial fortress. To maintain the illusion of absolute exclusivity, Olympus didn't accept just anyone. The minimum buy-in was $50 million. This was a psychological masterstroke. By locking out smaller investors, they made the mega-rich fight for a seat at the table. Sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, elite European pension boards, and Silicon Valley venture capitalists begged for an allocation. To be an investor in Olympus was the ultimate status symbol, a sign that you had penetrated the deepest, most lucrative layer of global capitalism. As the capital poured in, the scale of Olympus exploded. Within 18 months, internal ledger systems, monitored by the investors through a sleek, custom-built encrypted mobile app, showed that Olympus Global Fund was managing a jaw-dropping $12.8 billion. The numbers were massive, glittering on the screens of smartphones in private clubs from Aspen to Zurich. Every morning, investors logged in to see their net worth climbing by hundreds of thousands of dollars. The machine was working flawlessly. With $12 billion on the books, the Vance brothers began to live out the very myth they had constructed. They bought a fleet of matte black Gulfstream G650 private jets, flying across Atlantic routes multiple times a week. They spent their summers on a custom 300-foot superyacht docked in Monaco, hosting legendary parties for prime ministers, Hollywood actors, and central bankers. To the world, they were the new kings of finance, untouchable geniuses who had mastered the digital age. They were proof that in the modern world, data was more valuable than gold. But wealth on this scale leaves a massive footprint, or at least it should. Every multi-billion-dollar fund requires an army of supporting infrastructure. They need prime brokers, institutional custodians, massive accounting firms, and compliance officers to verify the sheer volume of daily transactions. Yet visitors to the Olympus corporate office in Midtown Manhattan noticed something odd. The office was breathtaking, wrapped in Italian marble and dark walnut panels. But it was remarkably quiet. There were no rows of frantic traders, no blinking server banks, no hum of activity. Just a handful of polite receptionists and sleek empty conference rooms. The justification provided by Julian Vance was simple: security. He explained to inquisitive board members that the entire trading engine was decentralized, hosted on secure, encrypted cloud servers scattered across international waters to prevent corporate espionage. The trading didn't happen in New York. It happened in cyberspace, driven by algorithms that required no human intervention. It was a comforting explanation that satisfied the billionaires. They went back to their champagne, completely unaware that the beautiful marble office was nothing more than a stage set, designed to distract them from a dark global pipeline. The absolute brilliance of a multi-billion-dollar financial fraud does not lie in how the money is taken, but in how it disappears. The moment an investor authorized a wire transfer to Olympus Global Fund, a clock began to tick. To the investor, looking at their encrypted smartphone app, the funds appeared to land instantly within their private portfolio, immediately generating that promised 12.5% interest. But in the real world, outside the digital matrix of the app, the money never touched a trading floor. It was routed into a shadow pipeline, a subterranean network of international accounts designed to strip the capital of its legal identity within milliseconds. Financial forensics would later reveal that the primary receiving bank accounts of Olympus Global were held at mid-tier commercial institutions in Manhattan, chosen specifically because they lacked the ultra-sophisticated automated red flag systems of global giants like JP Morgan or HSBC. But the money didn't stay there for more than an hour. A series of proprietary server scripts running on hidden cloud infrastructure monitored these influxes of cash. The moment a transaction cleared, the script executed a massive series of micro-splits, breaking a single $50 million investment into hundreds of smaller, unnoticeable transactions. These hundreds of smaller transactions were then systematically scattered across the globe, moving faster than any human regulator could track. The first destination was almost always the Cayman Islands, not into a grand bank building, but into an anonymous post office box registered to a newly formed holding company with names like Aegis Liquidity Services or Prism Capital Assets. These shell companies existed only on single sheets of paper, managed by local law firms who were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to ask absolutely no questions about the billions moving through their systems. From the Caribbean, the digital pipeline split again, crossing the Atlantic to European shadow havens. Portions of the capital bled into Cyprus, a jurisdiction notorious for its relaxed compliance laws regarding foreign funds. Here, the money was mixed with international corporate assets, layered through complex, fabricated commercial invoices. Olympus's automated system generated fake receipts for software licensing fees, cross-border digital infrastructure upgrades, and algorithmic maintenance consultations. To an outside auditor, it looked like a tech company paying its operating bills. In reality, it was a massive washing machine. The complexity intensified as the funds reached the final layers of the pipeline. The money was funneled through Panama and Switzerland, passing through the accounts of deeply historic private banks that specialized in ultimate client discretion. These institutions utilized numbered accounts, vaults of wealth tied not to a human name or a corporate entity, but to a random string of alphanumeric code. By the time the money arrived in these accounts, it had been stripped of its origin completely. The money was clean, silent, and entirely untraceable by standard Western regulatory agencies. While the money traveled this global maze, the Vance brothers maintained a flawless digital facade. They knew that if an investor or a regulator tried to pull back the curtain, they needed to see a wall of impenetrable mathematics. Arthur Vance spent months coding a secondary software engine, not a trading engine, but a simulation machine. This software was designed to generate completely fictional, highly realistic trading logs. Every single day, the system invented millions of simulated trades, complete with realistic timestamps, fluctuating market spreads, and fabricated counterparties, all to match the 12.5% return perfectly. This fake data was fed directly into the sleek investor applications. A billionaire sitting in a penthouse in Dubai could open his phone, tap his biometric lock, and watch a live graph of his wealth expanding. He could see individual, high-frequency trades flashing across his screen in real time, appearing to buy corporate bonds in Tokyo or shorting currencies in London. It was an aesthetic masterpiece of software design. It gave the ultra-wealthy exactly what they wanted: the feeling of absolute control and unmatched financial superiority, wrapped in a beautiful user interface. But a phantom of this magnitude requires absolute silence from the inside. The twin brothers knew that the greatest threat to a multi-billion-dollar secret is always human curiosity. To prevent any leaks, the internal corporate structure of Olympus Global was built like a classified military intelligence agency. Employees were heavily siloed. The marketing team in London knew nothing about the compliance operations in New York. The accountants handling the domestic expenses had no access to the primary banking records. Everyone worked in a vacuum, convinced they were part of a revolutionary tech firm, but seeing only a tiny, harmless fraction of the whole picture. Every single employee, from the high-level executives down to the office receptionists, was forced to sign draconian, multi-million-dollar non-disclosure agreements. The brothers hired a private security firm, staffed entirely by former military intelligence operatives, to monitor internal communications. Corporate laptops were loaded with keystroke loggers and automated wiping software. Employees were explicitly told that any discussion of the firm's proprietary algorithms outside of the office walls would result in immediate termination, financial ruin, and federal prosecution. Fear, masked as corporate prestige, kept the machinery running. For nearly 24 months, the secret pipeline functioned without a single hiccup. Over $12 billion had entered the Olympus system, and nearly $9 billion of it had been completely scrubbed when deposited into the founders' private offshore networks. They had successfully built an untouchable financial shadow empire, operating right in the open, under the very noses of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The illusion was flawless, the wealth was staggering, and the creators believed they were gods. But the problem with building an empire of pixels and lies is that it only takes a single, unexpected flaw in the code to bring the entire fortress crashing down. The downfall of a $12 billion empire does not begin with an international police raid or a dramatic whistleblower. It begins in the absolute silence of a graveyard shift. Marcus Vance was 24 years old, a junior compliance analyst working for a mid-tier clearinghouse in the financial district of New York. His job was the digital equivalent of manual labor, reviewing thousands of routine international wire transfers that the automated systems flagged for minor human errors. It was mind-numbing, exhausting work, designed to be executed by young graduates who didn't ask questions. It was a rainy Tuesday morning at precisely 3:14 a.m. when Marcus opened file number 8492. It was a standard cross-border transaction, a transfer of $42 million from an Olympus Global liquidity account to a private wealth vault in Zurich, Switzerland. To anyone else, the file looked perfect. The compliance stamps were there, the anti-money laundering codes were verified, and the digital signatures were cleared. But Marcus had an unusual talent, an almost photographic memory for data strings and digital patterns. As Marcus looked at the digital audit sheet, a cold sensation washed over him. The cryptographic signature at the bottom of the document, a long, complex string of random characters meant to prove the identity of the compliance officer, looked familiar. He opened his archive log and searched through files from 3 months prior. There it was. The exact same signature, down to the identical millisecond timestamp. In the world of high finance security, this was a physical impossibility. A digital signature is unique to the exact second a transaction occurs. This wasn't an oversight. This was a clone. Sitting alone in a dark, empty skyscraper with only the blue light of his monitor illuminating his face, Marcus began to pull the thread. He bypassed his standard queue and initiated a deep-dive search on every transaction linked to Olympus Global Fund over the past 2 years. As the server processed the request, lines of financial data began to cascade down his screen. He didn't find sophisticated trading algorithms. He found a mirror world. For every real dollar that entered Olympus, the system was generating dozens of duplicated transaction logs to fool the auditors. The deeper Marcus dug, the more terrifying the math became. He pulled up the official SEC filings of Olympus Global and compared them to the live clearing data moving through the banking backbone. The numbers didn't just disagree. They existed in entirely different universes. Olympus claimed to be executing up to 4 million trades per day through European exchanges. Yet, looking at the actual ledger infrastructure, Marcus could see that Olympus hadn't cleared a single live market trade in over 18 months. The entire $12 billion fund was completely stagnant. Marcus realized he was looking at history's most sophisticated digital mirage. But with that realization came a wave of intense paranoia. He knew how Wall Street worked. A junior analyst who uncovers a multi-billion-dollar fraud doesn't just get a promotion. Often, they disappear, or their careers are instantly destroyed by the powerful institutions protecting the status quo. He looked around the empty office floor. Every shadow seemed darker. Every hum of the air conditioning sounded like a threat. He was holding a financial nuclear bomb, and he was completely alone. Instead of logging out and going home, Marcus made a choice that would change his life forever. He plugged an unmonitored, encrypted external drive into his terminal. For the next 4 hours, working against the clock before the morning shift arrived, he downloaded every cloned audit sheet, every mirrored bank statement, and every fake cryptographic signature he could find. His hands shook as the progress bar crept forward. He knew that the moment he walked out of that building with this data, he was crossing a line of no return. By 6 a.m., Marcus stepped out into the freezing New York rain, the encrypted drive heavy in his coat pocket. He didn't go back to his apartment. He knew that if Olympus had internal security teams tracking data anomalies, they would realize within hours that a junior analyst had pulled their core compliance records. He bought a burner phone from a convenience store using cash, turned off his primary smartphone, and checked into a cheap, anonymous motel under a fake name. The chase had officially begun. From his motel room, using a secure browser, Marcus began to analyze the corporate structure of Olympus Global. He wanted to find where the physical heart of the operation was. The public face was the Marble Tower in Manhattan, but the technical filings pointed somewhere else. Deep within the regulatory paperwork, he found a reference to a secondary data center and operational headquarters located at an obscure address in Astoria, Queens. It was listed as the nerve center where the Aegis quantum AI algorithm was physically housed. Marcus stared at the satellite view of the Queen's address. Something felt completely wrong. It wasn't an office park. It wasn't a secure data fortress. It was a low-income industrial neighborhood filled with warehouses and small commercial shops. The contrast was bizarre. A $12 billion hedge fund run by international celebrities operating out of a gritty block in Queens. Marcus knew he couldn't trust the paperwork anymore. He needed to see it with his own eyes. He grabbed his coat, stepped back into the rain, and headed toward the subway. The subway ride from Manhattan to Queens felt like a descent into reality. As the train rattled out from beneath the East River and onto the elevated tracks of Astoria, the towering glass monoliths of Wall Street faded into the distance. Marcus looked out the window at the gray sky and the rows of industrial warehouses. He held his coat tightly around his chest, his fingers pressing against the encrypted hard drive. He was heading toward the physical address of a $12 billion empire, expecting to find at least a heavily guarded tech facility. When Marcus stepped off the station platform, the rain was coming down in sheets. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. He pulled up the address on his burner phone and walked down a gritty side street lined with auto repair shops and iron scrap yards. This was the heart of an industrial zone, completely void of the high-end luxury that Olympus Global Fund projected to its elite investors. There were no black town cars here, no men in custom Italian suits, just the low hum of heavy machinery. He arrived at the exact street number listed on the official federal SEC documents. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, wiping the rainwater from his eyes, convinced he had made a mistake. But the brass numbers on the brick wall matched his screen perfectly. There was no glass facade, No corporate logo, no security team with earpieces. There was only a flickering, buzzing neon sign that read 24-hour laundromat. A rundown neighborhood laundromat operating on a desolate corner in Queens. Marcus pushed open the glass door of the laundromat. The heat inside hit him instantly, thick with the chemical smell of cheap detergent and the rhythmic, heavy thumping of industrial washing machines spinning in rows. A couple of local residents sat silently on plastic chairs, staring blankly at their phones. No one looked up as he entered. This was the secondary operational headquarters of the most exclusive hedge fund on Earth. A place where billionaires believed their wealth was being managed by revolutionary quantum AI. At the back of the laundromat, next to a vending machine, was a narrow, unmarked wooden door. Marcus approached it slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned the handle. The door was unlocked, opening up to a steep, dimly lit flight of creaky wooden stairs that led to the second floor. The air grew cooler and smelled of old dust and dry rot. With every step he took, the thumping of the washing machines downstairs grew fainter, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. At the top of the stairs was a single, long hallway with peeling wallpaper and fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. There were 3 doors, 2 of them completely padlocked. At the very end of the hall was room 2B, the exact suite number registered to Olympus Global Fund's automated data infrastructure. There was no nameplate, just a rusted lock. Marcus reached out, his hand shaking, and pushed the door. It wasn't even locked. It slowly swung inward, creaking loudly. Marcus stepped into the room and flipped a light switch. Nothing happened. He pulled out his flashlight and swept the beam across the space. The room was completely, utterly empty. There were no server racks. There were no flashing blue lights of supercomputers. There was no high-speed fiber optic routing equipment. There was nothing but a cracked linoleum floor covered in a thick layer of undisturbed gray dust. A $12 billion financial fortress existing inside a vacuum of absolute nothingness. The flashlight beam caught a tangle of bare electrical wires hanging loosely from a hole in the water-damaged ceiling. They weren't connected to anything. They just dangled in the air, casting long, skeletal shadows across the bare walls. This was the physical home of Aegis, the quantum artificial intelligence that the Vance brothers claimed could predict the global markets. It was a ghost room, a carefully selected geographic coordinate used solely to satisfy a line on a regulatory compliance form. Marcus stood in the center of the empty room, the cold reality settling deep into his bones. The sheer audacity of the fraud was breathtaking. The Vance brothers hadn't just cheated the system, they had completely bypassed it. They realized that in the digital age, you don't need a real bank or real servers or real trade. You only need a beautiful app and a convincing story. If you build a convincing enough illusion, the world's richest people will willingly hand over their fortunes and never check behind the curtain. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a sharp, vibrating buzz. Marcus jumped, his heart skipping a beat. It was his burner phone. A text message from an unknown encrypted number popped up on the screen. It contained just 4 words. "We see you, Marcus." A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He looked toward the grime-covered window that faced the street. Olympus's internal security apparatus hadn't just noticed his data download. They had tracked his physical movements in real time. Marcus bolted from the room, flying down the creaky wooden stairs and bursting back through the laundromat into the torrential rain. He ran blindly down the industrial street, his eyes darting to every parked car with tinted windows. He felt an overwhelming wave of disillusionment and terror. The entire financial system felt like a lie, a grand theater managed by criminals and protected by shadows. He needed to get the data to someone untouchable, someone who couldn't be bought off by Olympus's billions. That same afternoon, a heavily encrypted digital package arrived on the secure servers of the Southern District of New York's Financial Crimes Unit. It didn't come with a name, just a brief message. The Aegis algorithm does not exist. Olympus is a ghost bank. The data attached is the proof. A senior federal prosecutor opened the files, expecting another routine tip from a disgruntled employee. But as he began to scroll through the cloned audit sheets and the identical cryptographic signatures, the room went dead silent. The federal prosecutors realized within an hour that they were looking at the largest institutional fraud since Bernard Madoff. The numbers were too clean, the patterns too precise to be anything other than a massive, calculated fabrication. They immediately initiated an emergency, closed-door coordination meeting with the SEC, the FBI, and the Cyber Forensics Division. A secret federal grand jury was impaneled before sundown, signing off on emergency warrants that authorized the total seizure of all domestic Olympus assets. As the sun set over New York, federal agents in unmarked dark SUVs began taking positions around Manhattan. They weren't moving in yet. They were establishing a perimeter. They monitored the Vance brothers' private communications, tracking their location to ensure they wouldn't catch wind of the investigation and flee the country on one of their private jets. The digital trap was being laid, its steel jaws hovering just inches above the heads of Wall Street's favorite prodigies. Back in his anonymous motel room, Marcus Vance sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. He had done his part. The fuse had been lit. He knew that by tomorrow morning, the financial world would never be the same. He looked at his hands, which had finally stopped shaking. The illusion of Olympus Global Fund was about to face the cold, brutal, crushing force of federal reality. The ghost bank was about to be hunted down. The collapse of an illusion is always violent. On a Thursday morning that began like any other on Wall Street, the trap snapped shut. Rumors had begun to leak through encrypted trader chat rooms that several multi-million-dollar withdrawal requests from European pension funds had been delayed by Olympus Global for over 48 hours. On Wall Street, delay is a dirty word. It smells of insolvency. Within minutes, the quiet whisper network that built Olympus turned into a screaming panic as billionaires rushed to log into their custom apps, desperately trying to pull their capital out. But the apps were dead. Investors were met with a spinning loading icon, followed by a cold, clinical error message: server connection timeout. The digital facade had been switched off. At that exact moment, a fleet of dark, unmarked federal SUVs turned sharply onto the concrete courtyard of the luxury Manhattan Tower where the Vance brothers held their corporate headquarters. The time for digital forensics was over. The physical raid had begun. Dozens of armed FBI tactical agents, accompanied by federal cybercrime investigators, burst through the pristine glass doors of the marble lobby. They didn't knock. They moved with absolute military precision, sealing off the elevators and flooding the executive floor. The polite receptionists stared in absolute shock as federal agents began slapping evidence tape across the walnut-paneled walls and forcing the high-level executives away from their terminals. Simultaneously, a second federal strike team breached the multi-million-dollar triplex penthouse where Arthur and Julian Vance resided. The heavy, reinforced oak doors were smashed open with battering rams. Inside, agents found a scene of frantic chaos. Hard drives were burning in custom-built thermal destruction units, and shredded financial documents covered the imported silk carpets like snow. But the federal cyber units were faster, pulling core memory sticks from the mainframe servers before the destruction scripts could complete their wipe. While the raid was unfolding in Manhattan, a private Gulfstream G650 jet, the engines whining loudly, was taxiing toward the main runway at an exclusive private airport in New Jersey. The Vance brothers had anticipated the raid by less than an hour. They sat in the leather seats of the cockpit, suitcases filled with millions in untraceable bearer bonds and cold storage cryptocurrency wallets resting at their feet. They were minutes away from international airspace, heading toward a jurisdiction with no extradition treaties. But the runway was suddenly blocked. Two black federal vehicles roared across the tarmac, cutting directly in front of the moving aircraft, their sirens casting a flashing blue and red glow over the wet asphalt. Armed tactical agents jumped out, rifles raised, ordering the pilots to shut down the engines immediately. The jet groaned to a halt. The door was lowered, and the charismatic geniuses of Wall Street were dragged down the steps in handcuffs, forced face down onto the freezing, rain-slicked runway. As news of the arrests hit the media, a shockwave tore through the global financial markets. News anchors on CNBC and Bloomberg broke into regular programming, their voices shaking as they announced that Olympus Global Fund was a total fiction. The breaking news banners flashed blood red across millions of television screens worldwide. The $12.8 billion that investors believed was safely growing in cyberspace had completely vaporized. Outside the corporate offices, a crowd of wealthy investors and frantic fund managers gathered in the pouring rain, staring up at the windows as if looking at a tomb. They were screaming at the police guards, waving their smartphones, demanding to know where their fortunes had gone. But the building was silent. The screens inside were dark. The realization that they had been fooled by two 30-year-old programmers was a humiliation deeper than the financial loss itself. Forensic accounting teams from the Department of Justice flooded into the empty data room above the Laundromat in Queens. They set up temporary folding tables under the bare hanging wires, pulling up the floorboards and running digital line traces through the building's infrastructure. They confirmed Marcus Vance's discovery. The entire setup was a ghost. The internet connection for the multi-billion-dollar fund was routing through a standard, consumer-grade Wi-Fi router hidden behind a row of commercial washing machines downstairs. By the close of the trading day, the financial tickers adjusted to reality. The value of Olympus Global Fund plummeted in a perfectly vertical line, crashing straight to absolute zero. It was history's fastest destruction of perceived wealth. $12 billion of capital, belonging to pension funds that supported hundreds of thousands of ordinary citizens, had dissolved into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of digital wreckage and broken lives. The federal trial of Arthur and Julian Vance began 6 months later in a packed Lower Manhattan courtroom. The charisma that had once captivated the world's financial elite had completely vanished. The brothers sat silently in gray prison jumpsuits, their heads bowed, as a mountain of digital evidence was systematically laid out before the jury. The prosecution didn't rely on emotional speeches. They simply presented the data logs, the cloned audit sheets, and the empty data room above the Queen's laundromat. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, major bank fraud, and international money laundering. The judge, looking down at the twin brothers, noted that their crime was not merely an assault on wealth, but an assault on the very concept of shared reality in the digital age. They were sentenced to 35 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, with absolutely no possibility of early parole. But a criminal verdict cannot restore what has been destroyed. Of the $12.8 billion that entered the shadow pipeline of Olympus Global, federal recovery teams managed to claw back less than 15%. The rest had been scattered too deeply across encrypted networks, anonymous shell corporations, and cold storage cryptocurrency accounts. The money was gone, swallowed by the digital void, leaving hundreds of regional pension boards and private family offices permanently ruined. The elite clubs of Manhattan and London went silent. The billionaires who had bragged about their exclusive access to the Olympus Fund quietly deleted their accounts and refused to speak to the press. The humiliation was absolute. They had spent decades building empires based on ruthless calculations, yet they had surrendered their fortunes to a phantom, driven by nothing more than the oldest and most dangerous human flaw: basic, unadulterated greed. And what of Marcus Vance, the junior analyst who pulled the thread? He never returned to Wall Street. The clearinghouse where he worked quietly terminated his employment, citing a technical breach of internal data protocols. He received no public awards, no financial bounty, and no hero's welcome. He walked away from the financial district forever, carrying the heavy knowledge that the pillars of global capitalism are far more fragile and far more corrupt than anyone dares to admit. Today, the luxury tower in Midtown Manhattan has a new tenant. The Italian marble lobby and the walnut-paneled conference rooms have been rebranded by another venture capital firm, promising the next generation revolutionary financial technology. The ghost of Olympus has been scrubbed from the glass and concrete, buried beneath a fresh layer of corporate marketing and new digital promises. The cycle on Wall Street continues, completely uninterrupted by the ghosts of the past. But if you travel outside Manhattan, away from the glittering towers of wealth and into that industrial corner of Astoria, Queens, you will find that some things never change. The brick building still stands on the desolate street corner, its weathered walls absorbing the constant rumble of passing subway trains. The neighborhood remains gritty, a quiet monument to the real world that the digital architects of Olympus tried so desperately to bypass. Inside, the neon light still buzzes, illuminating the rows of commercial washing machines, spinning the heavy loads in the heat. Local residents still sit on the plastic chairs, lost in the screens of their smartphones, completely unaware that they are sitting inside the geographic heart of a multi-billion-dollar international conspiracy. To them, it is just a place to wash their clothes. The physical world remains grounded in its simple, unglamorous utility. The wooden door at the back remains locked now, the stairs leading up to room 2B dark and covered in dust. The bare wires still hang from the ceiling, dangling over the cracked linoleum floor. It is a stark reminder of the great illusion of our time, that anything existing on a digital screen must be real. We live in a world where billions can be constructed out of light and code, and where the line between a financial fortress and an empty room is nothing more than a trick of perspective. As the sun sets over the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the concrete and glass, the lesson of Olympus Global Fund remains clear. Wealth is no longer held in vaults of steel and stone. It lives in the ether, a collection of pixels and trust. And as long as we value the beauty of the story over the reality of the facts, there will always be someone ready to build another ghost bank, hidden right out in the open, just above a 24-hour laundromat.